Welcome, everyone, to this week's Really Big Fan Podcast. I am your host, ChZuck. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, ACRONYM. That's where you say a thing.
Yeah, hi.
And we got a neat show for you today. We're going to be talking to longtime podcasting partner, as well as great friend Shonny Constant. He's got an event coming up this weekend that we're both super excited about, and we're going to be talking about the horror movie that he introduced me to, the horror franchise he introduced me to, The Evil Dead. Before we get there, I want to say sorry ahead of time if this show is not as polished as it usually is, but I've got Spider-Verse brain rot. We went and saw the movie on Sunday, and for the last 48 hours, just everything in my brain is just like, man, that was so good. How can I see that again? How can I live that for the rest of my life? That was so fantastic. So we'll definitely get into that as the show moves forward. But before we do, was there anything you wanted to say before we hit into headline time?
Nah, let's do it.
All right, it's headline time. So this is a story that came up over the weekend that you actually turned me on to. The woman who worked for Pixar, who historically saved Toy Story 2, has been laid off. Her name is Galen Sussman, and the way the story goes is back in 1988, they accidentally deleted a bunch of the files for the movie, and she was on maternity leave and just happened to have them backed up at home. And therefore, they didn't have to redo a whole bunch of Toy Story 2.
You said 1988, didn't you?
I did.
It's 1998.
1998. Oh, my God.
I wouldn't have been alive during Toy Story 2. And I was like, wait a minute. He said 88.
No, it was 1998.
We're doing great today.
1988 Toy Story 2 would have looked a lot different.
Oh, it would have been probably flat animation.
Muppets or maybe just stop motion.
Well, can I point out, too, that the Spider-Man brain rot that we were having is the exact brain rot we were having with the Muppets, too.
A little bit.
Because we hyper-focus on things. I think we're both slightly autistic and we don't know it.
Maybe. Maybe.
But I figured that, saving an entire movie to where the franchise didn't die would automatically give you some sort of tenure. And apparently that's not how things work.
Yeah, you would think so. You would think. I mean, at the same time, I also think that any other animation studio would be happy to have her.
Oh, totally. She's definitely going to end up at DreamWorks or something.
Right.
So I've got one for you here.
Okay.
It's just a short one, but just so you know, the new Blink-182 album is getting mixed. So they have finished recording and we're on to the mixing phase. So if you're crazy into Blink-182, that's coming your way.
What are your expectations for the new Blink album?
Absolutely nothing.
No.
If I go into a Blink album with expectations, I will be either sad or let down.
That was my next question. Is do you expect that you're gonna be like, eh, or are you gonna be like, holy shit, they're back?
It really depends on what it sounds like. You saw how I was with Fall Out Boy, so
yeah.
Fall Out Boy, not to crazy segue, but Fall Out Boy was that band that I found in high school before everybody else knew them, and yes, I was that person where I was like, I knew them before everyone else. I still kind of am, but I try not to be as ridiculous about it.
Sure.
But when Take This to Your Grave came out, I was showing it to all my friends and was super obsessed with it and stuff like that. And for me, listening to the new Fall Out Boy album, I was like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't the front half. There's certain stuff I like, and then the back half, I'm going, what the hell happened here?
Right.
And it's not that it's bad. It's just not what I expected, because when the first single came out for so much for Stardust is the album title for that. I listened to the first single, absolutely loved it.
Yeah, I thought the first single was real good too.
Second single, I was like, they have rivers in the video. This is funny, I like it. But I was really hoping when that album came, it was going to be more pop punk.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the front half is pop punk, and then it's just whatever Patrick Stump wanted to do.
Right.
So I say all this to say, with Blink, it's hard to know where it's going to go, because We've had 2 Matt Skiba albums. Now we're going to this. And I personally wasn't crazy about the song Edging when it came out.
Right.
And like it grows on you to where it's like it's poppy and stuff, but if I'm going to listen to Blink-182, I'm going to listen to the songs I really like.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really obsessed with their self-titled album that came out in 2003. Yes, 3, I believe. And so for me, I'm kind of
1983.
Yeah, 1983. Well, I knew it was either 2003 or 2004 because that was when I saw that epic concert where we mud moshed in the rain.
Right.
But when I look at what's coming with Blink-182 and hearing the first song of Edging, I don't know if they were trying to divert what that whole album was going to sound like, because that seems like something they would do. They'd put out a song that doesn't sound like the rest of the album to kind of fuck with everybody.
Okay.
But you have Tom that's gone and done Angels and Airwaves stuff. You've had Mark that's done like Plus 44. They also had Boxcar Racer at one point. These are all their side projects. And being that
Travis has worked with 9,000 people
9,000, exactly. And he's had his own albums where he drums and other people come in and do stuff. So with everything that they know how to do now after growing and splitting and coming back together, I have no clue what it's going to sound like, but I don't want to hope it's going to be... they're not going to sound like they did when they were in their 20s, okay?
Right.
And
for sure.
You can already tell with listening to Angels and Airwaves stuff, Tom doesn't sound the same anymore.
Mm-hmm.
His voice has changed. He still hits those really odd ways of pronouncing words, but...
Yeah, nobody has that accent.
They all are older, and they're all going to sound older. So we'll see how it goes, I guess. But fingers crossed, I like it, but... Honestly, I'm just happy they're doing stuff together again. That makes everything better.
Hell yeah. Very cool. Well, Nintendo surprise dropped more games on us for the Nintendo Online service. Just yesterday, they gave us on the NES app Mystery Tower, which is a Japanese Namco game, Kirby Tilt and Tumble on the Game Boy Color, and Blaster Master Enemy Below, and Harvest Moon on the Super Nintendo app. The one I'm most excited about is Harvest Moon. I play that on every emulator, Super NES emulator I get, and it's Stardew Valley. It's single-player Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley is based essentially on like how much fun they had with Harvest Moon on the Super Nintendo, and I'm sure I will use it as a relaxation tool on the Nintendo Online service. The other thing that's really spectacular about that is the Game Boy Color game Kirby Tilt and Tumble. Originally, the cartridge had like a little what's that thing called? That when you move it, it understands how it's been moved. I can't think of it. A gyroscope.
Oh.
Had a gyroscope in it, and because of the way the Joy-Cons work, one of them has a gyroscope in it. You can actually play it with your Switch the way you would play it with the Game Boy by tilting it all over the place like you do with some of the puzzles in Zelda Breath of the Wild.
Nice.
So that's fun. I love that they are still, even though it's minimal and it's spaced out, I love that they're still continuing to support the NES and the Super NES app, which we've had for 3 years now with some new releases here and there.
Cool.
So I dig that.
I've got so I'm gonna pair these two together because these two are very short. But Dave Grohl put out a message to the fans after doing the first chunk of their tour, and they said he goes, "It's been a while. Now that we've returned from our run of shows, I felt compelled to reach out and thank all of you for being there for us. Every night when I saw you singing, it makes me sing harder. When I see you screaming, it makes me scream louder. When I see your tears, it brings me to tears. And when I see your joy, it brings me joy. But I see you, and it feels so good to see you churning up these emotions together because we've always done this together, time and time again. See you soon, Dave Grohl," which is very sweet. Yeah. He's gone through a lot. Apparently, so I misspoke before when I was talking about his mom. Apparently, his mom died like a while ago.
Oh, okay.
I did not realize that, so my apologies there.
They just did that TV show, like last year or the year before?
Exactly.
Together.
So that's kind of where I was like a little lost. And Alex Gashel, concert photographer, she pulled it up and was like, "No, that happened like 6 months ago or so." I'm like, I just found out about that.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I kind of missed that one. The other quick one that I was pairing with this was that Metallica has a sense of humor.
Okay.
They tweeted out the other day, "It's time to celebrate the most important anniversary of the year. On this day, 20 years ago, Saint Anger was unleashed onto the world. Got a favorite song? Sound it out in the comments." They know that's their worst album. They know.
Well, finally, I've got good news for fans of Good Omens. Season 2 hitting July 28th. It's going to be 6 episodes long, and they just released the trailer for it, which you can watch online. I haven't seen the trailer yet. I just saw the news. As I said, Spider-Verse brain rot is real. I was scrambling to find a couple of headlines for this morning, but definitely looking forward to more Good Omens.
Nice.
Going to be a good time.
We've got 2 more really short, silly ones. Paramore has been bringing a bunch of people on stage. Their concert is today in Detroit. I did secure a ticket this morning against my bank account's judgment. But she's been bringing multiple people on stage as of late, she meaning Hayley Williams. And Lil Uzi Vert was one of those, who's a rapper.
Okay.
Which apparently he had DM'd her at one point and asked her, like, can we work together on a song? And she's like, I don't want to be that famous, bro. And I'm like, Hayley, really? Hayley, everybody knows who you are. What are you talking about? You're best friends with Taylor Swift. What is wrong with you?
Right.
So there's that, which, side note to that also, Hayley Williams is going to be on Taylor Swift's Speak Now Taylor's version, as well as Fall Out Boy, so that should be interesting. But she also brought out a Gen Z congressman, and I showed you this video the other day.
Yeah.
That dude is high-stepping. He is screaming the song. He is having a blast, and he came out, and the first thing that came out of his mouth was, fuck Ron DeSantis, which was amazing. So hats off to that guy. And just a little bit of silliness here. If you have not pulled up Tenacious D's cover of Wicked Game, you can do it now and see Kyle's balls just bouncing everywhere in his tighty whities as Jack chases him through the water. They did not do the video in black and white. I'm surprised they didn't.
Right.
But it's still funny as hell. And I will say this as well, that your prophecy about Jack Black and Peaches did come true, because listener of the show, Tony B., my Spidey guy, my goofy, like, I talk to him every day. His kid wanted to listen to Peaches.
Yeah.
So his kid listened to Peaches, and then it went right to Tenacious D.
Of course it did.
And he panicked, and he's like, Dad, that sounded so cool. And he goes, yeah, I know it did. And like,
that's the problem.
No.
It is unfair that Jack White has
Jack
that
Black.
good a sing, or Jack Black has that good a singing voice.
Yes. And it was literally just, it went from Peaches to other Jack Black songs in his catalog, and he's like, oh God.
Yep.
So you did think that would happen to someone, and
Make sure
it
you
happened to someone I know.
Make sure you have the parental guidance on whatever your streaming service is,
Yes.
so that your child doesn't get introduced to Fuck Her Gently at far too early an age. It's funny you brought up Bowser too, because I just saw this article on Kotaku. Apparently Bowser is 34.
What?
It's canon that Bowser is 34, and the reason for that is that there's a newly released unlisted video from Nintendo of America that shows you how to create a Nintendo account, and they use Bowser as an example, and he puts his birthday in as February 5th, 1989. Which is 4 years after Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah.
So he was 4 years old when he fell in the lava lake in Super Mario Brothers.
I mean, A, creepy, but B, I'm also older than Bowser.
Yeah.
By like a couple months.
Says in the same video, we see Bowser's junior birthday is March 3rd, 2010, which makes him 13 as well. Is he still wearing a diaper?
No.
At 13?
He's
Bowser
not
Jr.?
wearing a diaper.
Is he? No, I must
No.
be thinking of a different one then.
You're probably thinking of the baby, guys.
Thinking of Donkey Kong Jr.
Yeah, probably.
All right, well, let's get to our interview segment. Shonny Constant's going to come in here. He's going to tell us all about the Friends of Matilda Summer of 2023 event that we're going to be hanging out at this Sunday, as well as talk about Evil Dead next on the Really Big Fan Pod. Welcome back, everyone, to the Really Big Fan Podcast. As always, I'm your host, ChZuck, joined by Acronym, and I'm real excited today because we're joined by somebody who has also co-hosted a podcast with me, both the Talk Horror to Me podcast and the One Fall Show. I'm talking about my my co-host and good friend, Mr. Shonny Constant. How are you tonight, Shonny?
Hello, everybody. I am doing great. I'm doing great, Chuck. And you may recall, I would always say during those years of doing podcasts for roughly 20 people a week, the best thing about doing a podcast is being a guest on other podcasts, and that still holds true today. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent, excellent. Well, it's timely that we have you here because as of this show, when this show airs, you've got a show of your own, a punk rock show coming up locally. Do you want to tell our people about it?
Yeah, I'm putting on a benefit for the clinic I work at, all about animals, as well as a couple of rescues that I'm pretty close with, and we've got a bunch of bands playing and some vendors and some different things over at a place in Detroit called the Tangent Gallery, who are really cool about giving us the space at a really low price. And we're just going to try to raise some money. There's a group called Punks for Paws, Trash Cat over there. She prefers Trash Cat to her government name being used. Has put on a show for the last couple of years in September. And I've gone to them both and absolutely loved them and thought, well, I think there's room for another one. So I collaborated with her, made sure not to step on her toes. Her show will still be in September. But I'm just drawing from a different pool of bands and a different pool of potential guests, audience members, supporters. So we're going to give it a try and see. Hopefully, we're able to grow together rather than stepping on each other's toes. But we're at a particularly tough time right now. The economy is slowing down. Almost every rescue that I keep tabs on is saying that they are 100% full, and they have been for several months. It's a problem. It's a challenge that is really hard to adopt out of, but we'd really like to adopt out of this problem as much as we possibly can. But the people who contact rescues who then try to emotionally manipulate or blackmail a rescue who literally can do no more. I mean,
right.
Imagine hearing every day you just don't care about animals from somebody whose animal you can't take. Formerly non kill shelters, I guess. That's not the term I was looking for, but formerly longtime non-kill shelters are in a position that they have to. Now, these aren't obviously the independent rescues, which are just amazing. And that's what I'm hoping to get more involved in through this, through putting together this show. Really, I wanted to get more involved in the community. Because I work in a veterinary clinic in the operating room. It's a very closed area. I mean, I know that world really well. I know the animals that come through really, really well. We spay and neuter anywhere between 75 and 100 animals a day, 5 days a week. And a lot of those are street cats, for example, TNR, trap, neuter, release. Mm-hmm. If you ever see a cat out in the street, I'm a friend of street cats, by the way. If you ever see a cat out in the street with a clipped ear, there's a chance that was frostbite, but there's also a chance that is a cat that was trapped, brought in to be neutered, returned to the colony. The thought behind that being, if you just take them off the streets, then new colonies will take those spaces. But some animal populations have a tendency to start evening out once they get to a certain level. So by keeping those colonies out there, it prevents a whole new colony to develop as a result of the vacuum. And that's at least the goal. A lot like we heard so much with COVID, there's a certain herd level that you have to get to for that to really work.
Sure.
And so that's why, I mean, we do well over 100 community cats every week over at the clinic.
Wow. Yeah, the no-kill shelters having to consider, letting some of these animals go is really sad. Not to hit the Sarah McLachlan button in that, but it is very much an important thing, and I'm gonna just speak to that on the fact that you've got this event coming up, to have these events and bring that awareness to people as well. And to do it with also having all of this fun. It's listed 2 to 10 all ages show, music from Lily Livers, El Rad, Antimatter, Sharik, Randy Bastards, Bathroom of the Future, $10 suggested donation, and then a cash bar and raffles. So you got a lot planned, and that's super excited. When do the bands start?
Bands are going to start at around 4:00, and that'll put us pretty much till the 10:00. Being an older punk, a punk of a certain age, let's say, the idea of something of a matinee was appealing to me. I'd never worked on organizing or promoting a show before, and so I did not want to make it too daunting. I will say the Punks for Paws, they put on full 12-hour shows, and that is admirable. I love that they do that. I cannot hang for that long.
Sure.
So we went for a little bit more of a concise, and we'll see how that goes. But these are it's the poppier spectrum of punk. So this is we were excited about the all ages tag because I think that a lot of the friends that I've made over the years in the community are excited by the idea that they can bring nieces, nephews, kids. And these are bands that, generally speaking, that's cool.
Yeah, I think they'll do very well with a younger crowd as well as, all us older punks.
Yeah, and so that was the goal. And don't forget, Sisters on a Roll are going to have vegan tacos available. Chuck, I do believe that you, probably both of you know the Sisters on a Roll, and they're amazing vegan tacos.
Yes.
I am an omnivore. I'm going to an event on Sunday with one of the rescues that is going to be at our event, Misfit Angels Rescue, and they are going to have barbecue. I'm very much looking forward to partaking in that.
Nice.
But I can say these vegan tacos, chef's kiss. They're really, really, really good.
Yeah, after Street Beat went out, we've lost our vegan tacos.
Been a bit of a bummer.
This might be our new opportunity.
I like it. Well, the other reason I wanted to have you on the podcast is because it's the Really Big Fan podcast, and there is a set of movies that I would not be a really big fan if I had not been introduced to them by you, and that is the Evil Dead Army of Darkness series of movies. And I'm really curious, where did that franchise start for you? Like, what was your first exposure to it?
So being a kid of the 80s, I would watch the Saturday morning cartoons and whatnot. Now, I believe that, and I may be mistaken by a year or two, but I think that Army of Darkness came out in 92. So I would have been about 16 years old. I wasn't getting up at 6 a.m. to catch the Great Space Coaster or whatever the earliest cartoon of the day was. But I still liked spending many of my Saturday mornings with my feet up against the heat duct, watching whatever was on Saturdays on the network television. And there would be the two review fellows, Siskel and Ebert, and then there would be sort of a long form behind the scenes look at a movie that was coming out. Now, I didn't realize that this was just a big ad, and I would watch that with some relative frequency. The one that sticks out the most was Army of Darkness, and it was this movie that just had this crazy sort of mix of, I was a Dungeons and Dragons player, very avid at that time.
Sure.
So you had castles and this ridiculously rubber-faced man who was fighting, obviously model skeletons. And everything about it just was screaming my name. This was one of those instances where I went to the theater opening night, came out thinking I just saw the next great classic. And it turned out that it was me and like 100 of my friends across the whole country that saw this movie. It was not a movie that was well received. I don't think it came close to making its budget. But as people may have noticed, there's been a TV series. There've been a couple of reboots. I don't even know if that's fair. There've a couple of iterations now in the last 10 years or so, including Evil Dead Rise, which just came out and which we saw together, Chuck. And
that was fantastic.
I liked the previous one as well. The previous one was very much a very dark horror film, right to the point that your main character is a recovering heroin addict. It was dark. I dug it, but the first Evil Dead was a straight horror film. But I think that was really based on budgetary constraints and the conditions in which they were making the movie. These were Michigan State students who, if I remember correctly, had less than $100,000. They were driving to Tennessee to film at this cabin, which sadly, I throughout the internet age, it existed for a good long time. My understanding now is that it has burned down. The
You damn
people,
kids.
the people
Yeah,
involved
9
in the
times out of 10,
film.
somebody was urban exploring and tried to do steel wool. I will bet my life savings on it. Sorry.
I never had the gumption to go look for it, which is unfortunate. Like so many of us, one of my favorite things to point out to people is that the internet has the collected knowledge of all of human history. But what do we all use it for? You don't have to say it out loud, but it's probably not to make yourself as smart as the smartest people in collective human history.
Right.
I didn't even have the good sense to say, I wonder if there's a group of people who have found the Evil Dead. Tennessee is a beautiful state to visit. Love it. But apparently that movie was made under extremely rough conditions, a lot of rain, a lot of hauling equipment up and down muddy hills. There's a couple of books Bruce Campbell has written. Confessions of a B-movie Actor was the first one, if I remember correctly. And he talks all about the making of the movie and the challenges of basically starting a business out of art, and doing it in a way that has now we're 40 years on, almost 50 years on from the original Evil Dead. I think it has a 1981 release date, but it was one of those that they spent, I believe, several years making. It was started in the late 70s. Probably inspired still by Halloween. Halloween,
right.
John Carpenter's Halloween was such a huge movie that it inspired people to start making movies. So you still were seeing its effects 3 and 4 years down the line, because when you're dealing with film developing and realizing that, my camera wasn't in focus, and so I had to do the whole damn thing over again, and the tremendous costs involved in all that. You were seeing a lot of independent movies coming out for years. 4 years later, you'd have a movie coming out that was inspired by Halloween, but it took them that long to collect the money and to film it and then to afford to get it developed and then to sit and cut up all the little films. It was so much more work back then. And I think that's probably what makes Bruce Campbell still such an advocate for it to this day. He and Sam Raimi could certainly enjoy their lives without having ever giving Evil Dead another thought after the box office failure of Army of Darkness. But those movies, through passing videos on and then releasing ever increasing bundles of DVDs, like this DVD has this much and then another DVD with a little more. They really tapped into what we now just know as fan culture. Before it was a defined thing, they really helped to define it. I remember early 2000s, I went to a convention essentially to get Bruce Campbell's autograph. And that was out of the ordinary for me. I have very few autographs, and most that I do are just people that were at a convention. I happened to be there and I had the extra $20. Now it's 40 or 60. I don't ever have an extra $40. I'm sorry, celebrities at the conventions. Thankfully, it's become such a big thing. They don't need my money. But Bruce Campbell seemed to understand even way back then. He was 10 years removed from Army of Darkness, but yet he was showing up at a convention, and the fans that had built up over time through basically passing around, physical media, and doing something so weird. The first movie is a straight horror movie. The second movie had money from HBO and a big push from Stephen King at the time, actually. And it's the first bit of the movie is pretty much the same movie. They go in some different directions, but they also add a ton of slapstick and some very, very inventive visual effects. Obviously, all practical. This was still 1987, I think. But Sam Raimi just brought he was such an interesting character historically, because he loved classic movies. So we're talking to us, the 80s are classic movies. To him, he would have been looking at the 40s, 40. That's how that time works out. But, he was looking at Hitchcock. He was looking at John Carpenter, these just really meticulous directors. who again had to get their shots right because it was so expensive to have film developed. But he also loved the Three Stooges. I was not a Three Stooges guy, but I was a Looney Tunes guy. And if you, they're to me the same thing, different mediums
Definitely.
of the same jokes. And you got a lot of that, but with a twisted horror bent in Evil Dead 2. Also one of the great movie covers of all time, the skull, a little bit 3/4, but with the actual eyeballs looking off to the side. Beautiful work, very eye-catching. And then seemingly Army of Darkness was the end of it, and a lot of people didn't love it. It's a dark fantasy movie. Again, fit right in the pocket for me as a Dungeons and Dragons player and a fan of slapstickery. And blood fountains shooting geysers, blood geysers.
Yes, the blood fountain.
That's a movie that I can quote. Movies, and I when I talk at the clinic, I work with almost exclusively people in their 20s, and if we ever do end up talking about movies, I always anyone who demurs from their favorites, I always say your favorite movies are going to be the ones you saw at a certain age. And so, I mean, jerks can argue about whether your favorite movies are good or not, but they weren't 12 when they saw it. They weren't 16 when they saw it. So of course they're going to have a different point of view, and crabby old people seem to forget that they were ever 14 and they loved that thing because they were 14. The thing is not better. You were just younger.
Right.
Well, and there's something that goes with this too, because when you said dark fantasy, I started thinking of things like The Crow, Labyrinth, all that stuff. And there's like this weird pit of area between like 80s and 90s that are just like full of cult classic films. And I don't know if that's because of like the production value, if it's because of the story, if it's because it's not a reboot of a reboot of a reboot of a reboot. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but like you have these stories that are very beloved over a certain amount of time, like even stuff like Clerks and, these movies that kind of turned the idea of movie making on its head. But it seems like it's very centric to that area. You don't have as much romance about something in 2010 or, something like that. I mean, maybe down the line, like I know that I've mentioned before, like there was this whole bit about, how people were obsessed with Twilight. And now it seems to be like people are starting to talk about the Hunger Games like that.
Right.
And I'm like, are we getting to that point where the Hunger Games is going to be the new Twilight?
Yeah, it's nostalgia now.
But it's interesting to see those different things, especially when it comes to horror, because like horror has been around for so long and there's so much of it. You have streaming services now. You have Shudder that's just completely dedicated to a horror thing, and then you have movies that do lean into horror slapstick, like we all went and saw Renfield together, which really is right in there with that type of vibe.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to me to wonder, like, will certain things like Renfield and other movies that we're seeing now that are from the horror base become some sort of a cult classic? I mean, I think certain things that you see on Netflix, obviously, like something like Stranger Things is obviously always going to be around a cult classic. But some of the other movies, I don't know. Everything was franchising, like the Conjuring universe and everything else. Do those things all have a cult following, or is it because we love horror, or is it because everybody that is into horror is willing to give horror a chance, because even if it's bad, sometimes it's good?
Right.
Where's the line with all that, do you think?
It's very interesting. Look, horror nerds are a very specific kind of nerd, and I love them because they are often the meanest looking people, but just the friendliest if you can break bread over horror movies. A lot of very giving people in the horror community. I absolutely adore them. And, like with any, you have a toxic element to any, if your community is a Facebook group, there's going to be challenges, right? And it requires, like with everything now, a good curators. But there's so many horror fans and so many people willing to celebrate horror. It's really a very, very cool thing. And I find that now maybe I've just always gravitated towards them, but a couple of different satellite worlds. Land of the Creeps has a long time podcast, and they are just super into making sure it's a positive experience for everybody.
That's cool.
Decades of Horror, Gruesome Magazine, same. These are two areas where you can find a lot of podcast reviews of horror movies, and the people behind them I know personally. I've gotten to know personally, starting off as just a fan of their show, and I followed them for many years. And the reason that even if I fall away from them, I always come back is because I know that it's going to be a warm community. And for whatever reason, like Star Wars is where I think of, where just like for somehow, some way, one day, a whole bunch of people showed up who didn't understand what Star Wars was. And they were just accusing everything of being woke, when I'm like, oh, you mean you want the old days of this multicultural task to rebels fighting against the intergalactic police force, but you don't want the new woke multicultural collection of...
I can't remember.
Like, it's the same thing.
Yeah, I
This
can't
is
remember.
what the
Tony
story has always
Gilroy
been.
might have said it, where it was like Tony Gilroy, I think, was the one that did, but he was like, Star Wars has always been political. It was either him or
Right.
Mark Hamill. I can't remember which one.
Yeah,
But might have been Mark Hamill.
that sounds like a Mark Hamill.
Yeah, it's like Star Wars has always been political, and if you think anything different, then you miss the entire point.
Right.
Yeah, it's the rebellion against the evil empire, and the evil empire dress very, very similar to
Nazis.
Nazi Germany.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I don't think that was accidental.
No, no, the guy that was in The Force Awakens, the ginger guy that was in Harry Potter, I always blank on his name. He definitely looked like a Nazi.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting when I think about it too, because, like I say, with the streaming services and things, there are some ways that people get horror movies out so much easier now that it's the digital age. Like, if I had to edit a video by cutting film strips, I would just kill myself right there. But when it comes down to like horror movies, a lot of people like doing horror films from a directing standpoint and from a creative standpoint, because you can play with practical effects and you can go dark with it. You have access to things like liquid latex to make scars. You have fake blood, and you can just look at tutorials now on YouTube and TikTok to learn how to do this stuff.
I think part of it too is when it comes to the physical effects of horror, like the grosser it looks, the better.
Yeah.
So you don't have to worry about making something like super pretty, because if it looks gross, it's supposed to. It's horror.
Right. And the budget's not that bad for it. Like in terms of even creating, like, I'm a photographer, creating photography stuff that is semi-horror based. I can get liquid latex for under $8 shipped to my house. I know how to apply practical effect like that,
right,
because I have a makeup artist best friend that taught me. And so like there are ways to do that, but I make my own fake blood out of corn syrup so people can put it in their mouth and let it fall out and stuff. And it's super easy to do. And that's not to take away from the storytelling, because you obviously have to build a great script and do all these other things, but you're not going to have the same level of like, well, it needs to be Marvel movie tip top.
Right.
Especially when you're doing something as ridiculous and slapstick as Velocipaster or Thanksgiving or, even in that sense, Renfield too. A lot of that's digital, but there was still a lot of it that could have been probably practical. But the weirder or goofier it is, if you're leaning into the slapstick, like, an Army of Darkness movie, you're going to love that a lot more. Now, I've seen people make mistakes like Michigan-based horror movies where they go so hard trying to look so realistic that it ends up looking non-realistic. So you kind of have to find a good medium between the two. But with everything that's out there, whether you can do Kickstarters, you can do streaming services, you can do online releases now.
You can just drop your video on YouTube.
Yeah, you can literally do anything. Didn't we go down a rabbit hole of watching like found footage YouTube stuff that was horror based? And it was amazing.
Found footage horror shit on YouTube.
There's so many things that you can do with that. So like, and you've been in a horror movie. You supported a Kickstarter, correct?
Yeah, I bought my way into a horror movie because I've always wanted to be in one, and I thought I can afford this. And I flew out to Arizona and hung out for a few days in the desert. Thankfully, legal weed out there. I like that very much.
Nice.
I decided to go for a walk one day and ended up like 5 miles away from my destination out in the desert sun. That was questionable.
Yeah.
But I had a blast. And, I think one of the things that, so in the olden days of Hollywood, from what I've read, horror movies were sort of a cheap, you could get a cheap pop at the box office. And so somebody who was new to filmmaking, they'd have to go through horror to get to the movies they wanted to make. Well, eventually, and I think this has a lot to do with the late 60s, early 70s, the times when Rob Zombie was a kid. If you listen to Rob Zombies or want to look for a Rob Zombie interview, he talks about it a lot. But, there were these packages of black and white films that were being sold to basically every network around the country. So there's a certain set of old horror movies that every kid at that time was seeing. There was a fanzine coming out at the time that is, of course, going to elude me. It'll come to me after I'm done.
Fangoria?
No, prior to Fangoria.
Oh, okay.
Fangoria, late 70s through the 80s, but going back even 10 years before that. But it sort of had collected the kids, and it goes back to the idea that what you saw when you were 12 is the thing that you love. There was this idea that had gone from that horror was just bad for you. The way horror infiltrated into people's TVs was, well, horror is bad for you, but old black and white movies are good for you, right? The traditionalists, the conservative Christians, the Reagan era, now going into the 80s, they were like, well, how bad can it be? Because things that happened in the past are better, right? And as humans, we all lean to that to a certain extent, somehow, some way. Doesn't have to necessarily be leaned into in a toxic way that some people do, but we all are liberal and conservative in terms of what we like, outside of the political spectrum, but just as a philosophical thing. And so you had all these kids that were the Addams Family, the Munsters, they'd often, if I remember correctly, going way back into when I was 4, 5, 6, I think those were paired essentially with the Batman TV show from the 67.
Yep.
So we were seeing these things together, and it was mixing them all into one bowl. And so in the 90s, when you had a lot of independent filmmakers that were coming out of the woodwork, just people who were making their own films in their own communities, horror was the driving force for a lot of them. You do have your Clerks and your Tarantino stuff, which leans into a broader spectrum. But there were people who just wanted to make horror movies. I think it also leans itself into the DIY artist, someone who wants to work behind the camera, but also likes to get into the muck. You get to make your own muck, as you said, Amy, yourself.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fun in that, and so for a certain type of artist, if you want to be making physical things in addition to something that you're going to look at on a screen, a projection of light, horror is a lot of fun. And you can sort of hone your craft in terms of what you're building to be the sort of substars of your film, whatever these effects may be, while you're collecting the money and trying to find the people who are going to show up to actually execute the script. And then, all these things very challenging, so I admire anybody who's able to make any length of movie. You've made music videos, right? How many times, and I don't know the answer to this, so I apologize if I'm going way off the mark, but I'm guessing, how many times have you gone to a music video shoot and it turns out that not everyone who said they were going to be there actually shows up, and it turns out that those people were actually needed for the production?
Yes. There was actually even a music video where I had to be in the music video because one of the girls didn't show up, and the casting called for 5, and it was supposed to be a body positive shoot. And I ended up having to have the one other person that was in the room, who was the skinny person out of everybody, take the camera and have her film me, because she was used to filming me anyway. We were doing a lot of creative stuff together. So I ended up having her film my segment and then had to film everybody else's. And then I cut and colored and edited. And sometimes even when, like, you were talking about doing the event that you're putting together. There are times where people are like, I'm going to be there, I'm going to help you do all this, and then I end up doing 90% of it myself. So it happens on not even just film productions, just productions period, where you have that happen. But with horror, it's like you can rewrite on the spot. With a lot of things you can kind of mess with and rewrite on the spot. If something doesn't work out, be like, okay, well, here's a quick fix, because you don't need graphics, you don't need ABCD.
Right.
But when it comes to, you know, doing something that has a very strict storyline, or has something where like it has to be clean and well lit and everything else, like the cleaner the production, whether it's photo, video, whatever, the harder it becomes to do that work. I don't know if that's everybody else, but that's absolutely with me.
Interesting.
If I can be more gritty, grimy, mess with things and create chaos, I'm way more happy with that than trying to create like screenshots or photos of a t-shirt on a background with a white background, you know. So horror has its fun with that. And then you have the flip side of like where you were watching the movie Malignant.
Yeah.
And you showed me a really stupid scene. I call it stupid, but it's also brilliant.
It's amazing.
Of the actress in it has a face on the back of her head and she's fighting people backwards.
Yeah.
And he goes, you have to watch this clip. It's so ridiculous. And I watched it and I'm like, if that movie got greenlit, anybody who has a horror movie should just put their stuff in now. Like, because we have Shudder, we've got all of these other places. Like, if you can get that greenlit and people are willing to pay for that movie, then, you know,
I like
God
to think
bless.
that they conceptualized that scene and then worked backwards. How can we get there?
While she's fighting backwards,
While she's
they're
fighting
working
backwards. Yeah,
backwards.
they're like, how can we make it so that we get to that high point kind of thing?
Yeah, and we're hitting a spot in theaters where people are starting to get superhero fatigue. For the last decade, I've heard filmmakers complain. Tarantino still does it, but the idea that a mid-budget film just can't make it in the theater. It's got to be these giant tentpole 4-quadrant. It's got to be appealing to every. Well, horror movies have. It turns out that anything from $100,000 micro budget nothing film like Terrifier 2, maybe $250,000 all said and done. I have to admit I have not seen it. Don't know that I will go out of my way to see it. I liked the idea when I read about it, but heard it's off the Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. These are movies that just horror fans love to be horror fans, and our communities are really well established now through Facebook groups and all the social media, right? And so like, if you can ingratiate yourself to any horror fan, the word will get out quickly and we will come out, and they're finding that. And so we're going to see this nice little horror boom. Now how long that lasts, I don't know. It's certainly not going to be 20 years. We're not going to have 20 years of horror. I don't know if we're going to have 20 years of theaters, movie theaters. You know?
Right.
We're not going to have 20 years of the world the way this is going.
Well, but
where is Heartbreak going to feel good if we don't have theaters?
I guess we're going to have Nicole Kidman come right to our door.
Interesting.
Shonny, thank you so much for your time tonight, and thank you for introducing me to both Army of Darkness and Dead Alive back before. I was a big chicken. I did not like horror movies, and Shonny's like, no, this is funny as well as scary. You're going to love this.
I will never live out of that old lady eating the ear. I will never.
That's one of the greatest. I'm not a cringe person, but that is one of the great cringe moments. I think I got to see that. I was 17 years old, and it happened to be showing. This is the New Zealand film, Peter Jackson, who went on, of course, to do all the Lord of the Rings stuff. Mega superstar. He started off essentially following the Sam Raimi mold, doing independent, all practical effect horror movies, late 80s, early 90s in New Zealand. It had made its way to the United States. I don't remember how. I was going to a coffee house. There was a flyer on the wall, and I showed up. It was like a 20-minute drive to get there, which seemed like an eternity at the age of 17. Like, I was like, oh, I got there and they're like, we're a bar. You have to be 18 to get in the bar. I'm like, the thing says 17. And they're like, yeah, we don't know. Like, kid, you can't come in. And I don't know who this angel was that was working the box office, but he said, you know what? Give me a second. And he comes back and he says, you do not drink alcohol. and he let me come in, and I had just like I think that sealed me as a horror fan, to be honest with you. The combination of the bombast of that movie, Dead Alive. If
Yeah.
you've not seen Dead Alive and you enjoy the idea of horror comedy, find it. It is brilliant, but only the non-rated version. There was a rated R version released, stunk. Cut out all of the fun stuff. All of the fun stuff.
Kicking ass in the name of the Lord.
Shonny,
That's my mother you're pissing on.
I look forward to seeing you this Sunday at the Tangent Gallery for the Friends of Matilda Summer of 23. All the punk bands that you could ask for, as well as the cash bar and the raffles for a $10 suggested donation. One last question. Will Matilda be in attendance?
Yes. So if the weather continues to hold, the weather's gorgeous right now. As a gardener, I feel like we're on the front end of a really scary drought. It's really nice to have had this beautiful sunny days, but man, we have not gotten a drop of rain. And we're like, the dog days don't normally start till late July and August, and we are like in dog days weather. But the nice thing is, if the weather stays like this, and we're going to be able to host the entire thing outdoors at the Tangent Gallery Sunday, June 11th from 2 to 10 p.m. $10 suggested donation, although no one will be turned away for lack of funds. So come on out and hang out with us. And yes, if we're able to hang out, if it's rainy, we have to bring everything inside. I'm not going to bring Matilda. But if we're able to hang outside, yeah, Matilda will come with me. I'm on the fence about her sister. It's they have a roaming club dog. People who know the place bring their dogs. This is not necessarily a, hey, let's all bring our dog event. I don't know how that would go. That was not part of the deal with the club, but I do know that last year I showed up with Matilda and we were able to walk in. So that was cool. She had a great time. The only I just
look at that face. Look at that.
I don't know if I can get it.
Look at that cute face.
You can find that picture on social media as well if you want to see that cute picture in color, or look at your local coffee shops and record stores, because we've been attacking them like crazy.
Man, the community came out so huge. Talk about punk time. You know, I'm closing in on 50 years old now, and I'm so happy to say that punk time is real, and punk time has not changed. We started, basically, we're like, oh, we only have a couple of weeks. We better actually do this thing. And the community came out huge. Over Memorial Day weekend, the bands, Amy, you were integral in getting this thing off the ground. And we got, I don't know, 60, 70 posters hung up, flyers distributed all over the place. It was very, very cool and super invigorating. And the awesome thing is I had spent about a week just basically waking up every day in a cold sweat. I haven't done the things I'm supposed to have done. I've been procrastinating. I don't even know why I chose to do this in the first place. This is all out of my league. And man, people came out. I am just now just looking forward to it. And awesome. I've got people coming at me with questions, and they're like, but what about this? And but what about this? Have you thought about this? And I'm just like, nope. Nope. We're all going to show up that day, and we're going to hope for the best, like every punk show I have ever been at in the city of Detroit over the last 30 years.
Thanks so much, Shonny. We'll be right back with more of the Really Big Fan Podcast. Welcome back. It's the Really Big Fan Podcast. Thanks, as always, to Shonny for jumping in and talking to us about his love of horror movies, Evil Dead and otherwise, and promoting his show that, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, we're both really looking forward to going to.
Heck yeah.
It's going to be a fun time.
Do you have a quiz for me today?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
Kinda. Because I know that, like, you've seen some of the Evil Dead movies. I introduced you to Army of Darkness and stuff, but I don't want to hit you with, like, really hard Evil Dead questions.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't win those, honestly, but you know what you could do?
What's
that? Because we didn't plan this part out at all today.
Spider-Verse brain rot.
Yep, Spider-Verse brain rot, hashtag. Why don't you ask me, like, give me 10 of your favorite horror movies and see if I've seen them.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, because that was one of the questions I was going to ask you. It's another one of those there is no wrong answer questions, but what would you say is some of the scariest horror movies you've seen that, like, you had to, like, take a, like, for instance, there's a movie that's on Amazon called Hell House LLC.
Mm-hmm.
I had to stop. I was watching it on my phone,
Yeah.
and I had to stop watching it and take a break in the middle of the movie because I was like, all right, this is creeping me out.
So I haven't necessarily like. I'll say Midsummer is probably the most fucked up movie I've watched, but I wasn't afraid of it.
Sure.
That's the same time because it's like psychological thriller more so.
Right.
I do remember that Chris made me watch The Conjuring at his house before.
Okay.
And I was staying there on the couch for the night. I forget where we were going, but it needed to be early in the morning, so I just stayed there.
Okay.
And he was like, "Oh yeah, watch The Conjuring." And so we watch it. And then he goes, "Okay, I'm going to bed." I'm like, "Hey, do you have like a Harry Potter DVD set or something?"
Cartoons
and then he
or
goes,
something.
"What?" And I'm like, I don't do horror movies very well, and I'm in a place I don't know, and I'm going to wake up freaked out because I'm in a place that I don't know.
Yeah.
Can I just put on the Sorcerer's Stone or something while I sleep? And he's like, "Oh my God." He goes, "And you know what? You make yourself out to be such a badass." And I was like, "Hey, I never told anybody that I wasn't afraid of anything. I just act like I'm not."
It was spooky scary.
So The Conjuring definitely was one of those movies where it was like, I definitely, not to sound like a weirdo tinfoil hat, but I definitely feel like supernatural stuff is real. In terms of ghosts.
Yet you want to fuck with Ouija boards.
Yes, exactly. No, I just lean into fucking with Ouija boards just to upset you.
Just to upset me?
Yes, but like that definitely freaks me out. I think the only thing that I've ever cold stopped because I was so freaked out was the Trinity Killer in Dexter.
Okay.
And it was because I had moved all of my stuff at that point into the basement of the house I was living in. And walking down the stairs when it was dark at night and stuff like that was really giving me the heebie-jeebies when I was watching Dexter. So after I got through the Trinity Killer, I was like, I can't watch the rest of the show, and I never finished Dexter.
Right.
Like, I'm like, it's getting worse. It's getting harder. But sometimes I'm more not great with gore in comparison to, and it's not that I don't like gore or anything, but sometimes if it's like overly gratuitous, I'm a little bit like, ugh, which happens to me more with The Boys than anything else.
For sure.
So.
Paranormal Activity.
Yeah.
The end of Paranormal Activity where you're waiting for something to come through that darkened doorway. That suspense it just kills me.
Yeah, that type of suspense is the problem because it's like I think it was Alfred Hitchcock that said something to the effect of like absence of sound is worse than actual sound.
Yeah.
In a movie, and when I watched Woman in Black, that there was two things. It was either like absence of sound or repetitive sound happening before the big boom.
Sure.
And there's a sequence, and this is in the Daniel Radcliffe version of the Woman in Black. There's a rocking chair in the corner, and the rocking chair slowly starts moving, and then it starts getting faster,
right,
and faster. And by that point, it's whack, 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 and that freaks me the hell out. I don't know why, but like that one seared into my brain. Also, not a horror movie, but a suspense one. The Conversation with Gene Hackman.
Yeah, I never saw that.
It's from the 70s, I think. It's supposed to have a Watergate type feel. It's one of Harrison Ford's earliest roles. There is a sequence where somebody was killed and then shoved into the plumbing or something like that.
Okay.
And he flushes the toilet, and the toilet starts raising, and then just blood starts coming out of the toilet. And he wasn't the one that put it in there. He was listening to the conversation next door.
Yeah.
And so he had like all this tech that he was doing. So as the blood just starts pouring out of the toilet, that one stuck with me too.
Right.
So it's like little like sequences like that, or like What Lies Beneath, where like I can't do lakes.
Mm-hmm.
Everything with What Lies Beneath just freaks me out.
Right.
So but it's more of like suspense that really gets me. If something is over gratuitous in like gore or scariness, sometimes I have the opposite direction and I laugh at it.
Yeah, exactly. That's been my because when I was a kid, as is well documented in many podcasts, I was a huge chicken. Like if you'd asked me at like 11 years old what scares me, Poltergeist 2, the Twilight Zone movie where the little kid brings the Tasmanian devil to life out of the TV, like the weird version of that was always friggin' terrifying to me and stuff.
Yeah.
But then now that I'm older and after watching a lot of comedy horror like Army of Darkness and Dead Alive, now the more bombastic the
Yes.
gore or the jump scare, the more my natural reaction now is to go, ha ha, you
Yeah.
got me.
I
Nice.
can't tell you how many times I did that during Renfield.
Yeah.
Because there's like one part where like he like tears some guy in half.
Yeah, somebody
And-
drops somebody on a car and they just explode like a water balloon.
Yeah. And like, but there was like the one where he like had jumped down the center
Yeah.
of that apartment complex and he just tears somebody in half and then he's like waving at Aquafina like with a smile on his face as he goes down and I'm just like, this is fucking ridiculous.
Right.
So
Exactly.
like that's where I get those moments where I'm just like, oh my god, I shouldn't be laughing, but I am.
So here's a question you may or may not know the answer to. What is Bruce Campbell's name? His full name in Army of Darkness? No,
No Ash.
Ash. Yeah,
That's all I
it's
know.
Ashley Williams.
Ah.
And then here's probably an easy one for you because so I'm gonna give you 4 things and you got to tell me which one or Evil Dead has not been turned into: a musical, a video game, a board game, a motorcycle. Which one of those has not had the Evil Dead branding attached to it?
I would have to guess a video game.
That is incorrect.
Really?
Yeah. There's a bunch of Evil Dead video games. A motorcycle. They've never made a Evil Dead motorcycle.
See, I thought you were trying to trick me, so I didn't.
With the
pick that
motorcycle?
one. Yeah, I didn't
Yep.
pick that one automatically because I thought you were messing with me.
Nope. Nope. So yeah, you're 0 for 2.
That's fine.
It's all right.
I have literally seen Army of Darkness once, Evil Dead once,
Yeah.
musical once. That
Right.
is the extent of my knowledge.
Yeah. That's
And
all
I
good.
don't retain things the first time around.
Well, yeah, it's like
So-
yesterday, last night I meant to stream, and then instead I came home and I put on Enter the Spider-Verse because
Mhm.
we were talking about wanting to watch it again after.
Spider-Man brain rot.
Right. And I'd ask you about the after credit sequence. And you're like, I didn't see it. I'm like, I've watched this movie so many times. How have you not
Well,
seen
I
the
have
after
only
credit
watched
sequence?
that movie once.
That's wild.
Or like maybe twice once you bought the DVD, but I've never rewatched it
Right.
because it's not easily accessible to me.
Yeah, it's just like when it was on Netflix, it was like, oh, Spider-Verse? Sure, I'll put that on. And
I
just
didn't
leave
even
in the
know it was
background.
on Netflix. I thought it was off
It's-
streaming this entire time.
It's
That's why.
not. It was on Netflix for a while, and now it is not.
Yeah, when it was on Netflix, I didn't know it was on Netflix because then I would have watched it.
Yeah.
Because it's my favorite one.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, now this new one might have, pushed it out, but like
Right.
at the same time, I was like, because it wasn't on streaming, I don't typically go and grab a DVD and watch a DVD.
Yeah.
So it's that.
Well, a couple of things that came up while the interview was going on that I forgot to mention. A couple of wrestling news highlights. First of all,
Breaking news.
AEW has confirmed 2 matchups for their Forbidden Door event, where it's them and New Japan.
Mm-hmm.
One of them over the weekend was Brian Danielson is going to fight Kazuchika Okada, and
Yep.
then they also confirmed that Kenny Omega will fight Will Ospreay, which will be a good match. Those guys are 2 flippy dudes.
Seth Rollins is so sad that he doesn't get to fight Will Ospreay.
He's so upset that he doesn't get to be a part of that stuff. And the other bit of news, which actually I saw on Twitter about 10 minutes before we went live, is that one of our favorite wrestlers on Twitter, the Iron Sheik, has passed away at the age of 81. There's a 4-panel eulogy for old Sheiky Baby.
You just found. That's how I found out just now. So
Yeah.
I have no words.
Yeah, that's but 81, and as we've talked about before, we love his presence on Twitter, and we're not entirely sure that it was the Sheik, and if it wasn't, I hope it continues into perpetuity.
Well, yeah, that was my
so
thought.
he can be
It was
immortalized forever.
as sad as that is, that was the first thing that went to my mind. Was like, no more Sheiky tweets.
Yeah.
That's
So.
like my favorite thing on Twitter. Now I can leave Twitter. The Sheik is gone.
Yeah. Well, just think of it this way: how blessed are we to have been alive at a time where the Iron Sheik was on Twitter
It's true.
saying Hulk Hogan is the worst, calling everyone Bubba. Well, we end the show as we typically do, talking about our serotonin boost. But this week, I think we both have the same thing.
Yeah, we were going to actually end segment and do this at the end. So we'll do like a little brief overview, non-spoilers of what we thought of the Spider-Verse as our serotonin boost.
Right.
We'll run the production, and then if you have not seen Spider-Man, don't listen to the end tag production because we're going to do heavy spoilers there, and I don't want anybody. This is the part where I say, Tony, turn off the podcast because I'm doing this for you.
Right.
I mostly am doing this for you, and then everyone else that hasn't seen it, but mostly for you.
But I think we can safely, non-spoilerly, say that if you haven't seen Spider-Verse, you absolutely need to.
Yes. Yes, the animation is amazing. The storyline is amazing. How did you put it that you didn't think that they'd strike lightning twice, but they did?
I knew that it would be good. I could not have imagined it would be this good.
Yeah.
And I love the first Spider-Man Enter the Spider-Verse. In fact, I'd said that was my favorite Spider-Man movie when it came out, and that held true until 2 days ago.
Same.
And now the new one is probably my favorite Spider-Man movie ever.
Right, yeah. And it's definitely worth seeing. I know a lot of people are struggling on cash right now. If you want to see the Spider-Verse movie, go to an AMC on Tuesdays.
I think it's an MJR. Is it AMC
no,
or MJR?
it's AMC.
Okay.
Isn't it? Yeah, it's AMC. Yeah. They do $7 Tuesdays.
Yep.
So if you are short on cash and don't want to fork out the $14 or $20 depending on where you're going to see a movie, that would be my suggestion, is to hit up an AMC, see the national anthem that is Nicole Kidman saying "Heartbreak feels good in a place like this."
That's right.
And get yourself some Spider-Verse, because it's definitely worth it.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to quote-unquote end the show here and then hit spoilers, so make sure that you follow us on all social media. We are currently blowing up, sorry to DTG Canada, I believe is his username, and Sam for pinning your comments on the Transformers video, because now they're getting as many notifications as we are. But you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, everything else by going to acronyms.com/reallyBigFanPod. That is where also you can find our Patreon information. Please, 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 if you love our podcast, go in on the Patreon. We have not set up any tiers as of right now, so you can still name your price as to what you want to donate to us to help us keep this podcast alive. If you only can donate $1, that is totally cool, just as long as, we can continue to do this and help us get, the equipment that we need, or even just, pay for the time it takes for us to do this every week.
Exactly.
We greatly, greatly appreciate it. And like I said, hit us up at acronyms.com/reallyBigFanPod. And then the podcast drops at 3 a.m. on Fridays.
3 a.m., just like Paranormal Activity. That's when the ghosts come out.
And when 3 a.m., I must be lonely.
Oh, no.
I say, baby.
There goes the DMCA. We got nailed.
I don't sound like him. I can't hit Rob Thomas's range.
Man, it's a hot one.
And see.